Hello and welcome to the Magical World of G. Michael Vasey podcast, Series 3. We've had a great series so far and some really good guests, and today we've even upped the ante. We're going to be talking about Earth Energies, the Grail, and many other topics with Rory Duff. Rory is an expert on Earth Energies and has actually written books classifying Earth Energies into different types of lines so that we can all better communicate with one another when we start dowsing. So as usual, I started out by asking Rory how he got started.
Actually, it was when I was working as a geologist on the mines. We used to get rung up by the local farmers, and there's an Italian geologist there called Paolo, who was a senior geologist to me. Took me out one day to meet one of the farmers and pulled out these dowsing rods from the boot of his car, and I was kind of like shocked and thought, right. And he says, "Oh, we know the water's here, Rory. We just don't know exactly where." And as you know, with limestone, it has small channels, and if you don't hit those channels with your drill, you could be 2 feet out and you won't get the water. But when you use the dowsing rods, it's amazingly accurate. And after a while, when you douse and then drill and find water, that is a really necessary feedback loop that makes you realize you're not making it up. And we then used to practice on the lawns on the mine. They have lots of mown grass lawns, and they're all got sprinkler systems fed by pipes. And you can douse for where these pipes are under the actual earth. And when you get a response, you just put your dowsing rod down into the earth and you can feel the pipe. So it's another wonderful way of dowsing and getting feedback. And I guess that just sat with me. And then it began to realize how many professions started to use dowsing for various reasons. You know, engineers in just looking for pipes and electricity wires. And so it was quite natural. And then when I came back to the UK, I came across Hamish Miller's work. He was dowsing these earth energy lines. I was curious at the time as to what earth energies were and human energy, because I was studying Aikido, and they were on about ki energy. And I was thinking, well, what is this stuff? Just like yourself, a scientist, you just ask questions and you have this curiosity. So I started looking into what Hamish Miller was doing and got his book, The Son of the Serpent, and then started think, well, if I can douse for water, I can douse for earth energies. And I went to a church in Crediton in Devon, Holy Cross Church, where the lines were, and just walked around it for about an hour and realized, yeah, I can pick this up. And so I started tracking them, found them where he was finding them, and just pursued that sort of, actually more in the science. I didn't do that much more dowsing, just the occasional checking for them. But I really started investigating science, right down to quantum theory and relativity, and in specific gravity. I thought gravity had a connection to ki energy. So I explored that for a while. And then literally through synchronicities, and that's been a sort of thing throughout my life, I came across an old gentleman who was the most amazing engineering physicist who'd come up with this new theory on the creation of the universe. And he'd had some new thoughts which didn't need relativity. And my work took me up to Wiltshire, which was not far from him, where he lived in Bathford. It was probably after a few years I'd been working with this new line of work in communications and coaching for large corporation and training and coaching, basically, that I began to get interested in actually something that started at the very end of the Son and the Serpent book. Hamish said he met a gentleman, and I forget his name, at Avebury, who'd come across another energy line running away from the Avebury Stone Circle. And it ended in a little grassy knoll not far away in a spiral. And I thought, well, that might be interesting to investigate. So I went there and then found it didn't really end in a grassy in a spiral. Then I found its pair, and I started tracking these two energy lines. Really, I mean, I went literally. It took me weeks, but I tracked one all the way to High Wycombe, which is up near towards London way. And the other pair, the other way, I all the way across into Wales.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is strange. They're going all over the place. It then began me thinking, well, if I'm going to find out what's going on here, I need to choose an area and find out all the lines in this area, and then I'll get a picture.
Right.
And it's where it started. Yeah.
Let's before we move on, let's just go back to dowsing, because, like you say, you're a geologist, and maybe you're a little surprised when dowsing rods come out. You and I have probably both come up against the people that just say, dowsing, it's pseudoscience and nonsense and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sure that you and I both know plenty of engineers and other scientists that routinely use dowsing for all kinds of purposes. Have you developed any thought as to what is actually going on with dowsing and why it works in a scientific way? Or did you just kind of have that as a given and move on?
What was very helpful to me was meeting this retired gentleman, Ron Pearson, who'd come up with this new theory on the creation of the universe, because it began to make a lot more sense scientifically with regards to how the mind works and the connection between the conscious and the subconscious. And the key difference with his theories is that he inadvertently realized that there had to be intelligence behind the universe in order to create the universe. And it was the way in which something he calls opposed energy dynamics, which is his theory on how energy moves on a subquantum level in waves to create particles on the higher quantum level. And the intelligence arose to form the universe, and it created habitats for minds in different environments and different meta frequencies. And this was an important thing when it starts looking at frequencies and vibrations, and how that actually then began to connect with some of the things that Tesla was saying. But this is completely opposite to modern science, who absolutely insist you need to have relativity in every single thought about how the world was constructed, how the universe was constructed. And Ron said, actually, you don't need relativity. When you start looking at modern science that require relativity, they can't put it together with quantum theory. They failed nearly 100 years of effort trying to marry this relativity with quantum theory yet. And they don't have a theory of everything. So they're the ones without foundations in science. And when you start looking at their efforts to try and find dark matter and dark energy, which have been abject failures, which have cost billions of pounds, and they go off making up this ridiculousness of things like black holes. And black holes are unfalsifiable. You can't even disprove them, and you can't even prove them. And Karl Popper will tell you, if it's unfalsifiable, that's pseudoscience. So you mentioned pseudoscience before. Well, the whole relativity and black holes and this background medium, there's your pseudoscience.
It's funny because my father taught me, and he was, he wasn't a university man, but he was a bright fella, and he was an engineer. And he was asked by our neighbours how to find a pipe that went through their backyard. And I was just kind of vaguely in the area, and he just ran off, and he got a couple of pieces of metal in the garage, and he dowsed for it, and it found it for them. And they were totally amazed, as was I. And then he started to teach me, how to use dowsing to find a water bottle. Now, the water bottle was purely visible to start with, but then he would take the water bottle and hide it and have me find it. And this was a game, it was a game to me that I played when I was a young kid. Like you, dowsing for energy lines just seemed natural somehow and had no issues.
Now, but the basic science, just quickly behind it, is that everything vibrates. Everything has a vibration. And everything got a slightly different vibration. So, salt water is different from fresh water, different vibration. So, you'll be able to pick up one from the other. It's a bit of conditioning and programming to be able to have your collective field of energy that's around you, which is emanating out, which is a gravitational field, electromagnetic field, and a vibrational field that you carry around with you. Everything else has got this field, and it's those fields that interact. And if you can't consciously see these fields, but your subconscious is aware. So if you tap into your awareness with your subconscious and ask to the picking up the field of oil or the field of electricity, you can program your mind to be able to do this, just the same way you can program yourself to wake up at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
You can deliver instructions to your subconscious, which will carry it out.
It's funny, the disconnect between materialistic science and I don't know, even in everywhere you look, it's the same. Archaeology and physics and chemistry, and even to some extent geology, our own science. There's a sort of mainstream, thou shalt not cross into other areas, and if you do, it's called pseudoscience. And yet, as a person that's got 30 years of studying magic and occult, I can tell you that there's nothing remotely about quantum physics that the old alchemists didn't already know. They just described it in different ways. So, there's nothing new in the world, even though some of these materialistic scientists perhaps think that they're breaking new ground. They're really not. They're just describing it in a different way to the way it's been previously described by a different group of people that they would label as, quacks, basically.
There's a lot of research scientists now who are desperately on the edge of trying to explain what they're coming across with the constrictions that they have placed on them in regards to the underlying physics. They know it doesn't fit, but they have to toe the line because they're what I call emotionally controlled decision makers. They're emotionally controlled because they need to have their paychecks, they need their mortgage paid, and it's only when you become retired and you're independent, you're not that you can be let loose and free to do the research you want to do, and you don't have to conform to the specifics about writing papers and getting into prestigious journals and not upsetting the apple cart, because as soon as you do, you're cut off. You're cut off from budgets. So everything is massively controlled by the money men who stand to lose billions on new inventions if they're not owning those patents. So they don't like innovation. So that the money people will always stick to a particular formula that suits them.
Who was it said something like science evolves at funerals?
Yes, that's a very, very true. Yeah.
Quite correct. You don't cross the person who is the expert and authority in a particular field, no matter how small. You do so at your peril. Yeah.
And it's not just in research, it's actually in companies. I did 3 years research in the mines, and I wrote an article. Actually, I handed it in with my resignation because I wanted to move on. But I did everything which I shouldn't have done, according to them. I just sent copies out to everybody in the company. And that caused such mayhem. I was getting phone calls even after I'd left the companies, because apparently what happens is, well, I knew exactly what happens. You give your report to your boss, who looks it and sends it back to you. And then once he's happy, he gives it to his boss. And then once that person's happy, it sends back down the line. So you make the alterations again. So finally, what happens is that when you get to the main geologist, then it's hardly what you've written at all.
Yeah.
And I don't like that.
No, me neither. No, it's counterproductive, and it's
Yeah.
Anyway, so moving on. Tell us about your work with the Grail and the concept of the Grail that you've developed through working with Earth Energies.
Yeah, and this is one of the wonderful things and strange things about working with Earth Energies is that it takes you on a journey you never really quite expect to go on. And it started with the realization, and this is a longer story, but that there were some very, very powerful energy lines in the world. In fact, back then in 2011, there were only 3 pairs. And it led me to want to know where these 3 pairs of energy lines were, where their intersections were. And the nearest one was in the southeast part of Spain, in an area called Murcia. And I probably pronounced that wrong, I always seem to. But it needed repairing. And so we needed to get a team of people down there to repair the node in that area. But when we were there, having done the work, we were given this very strange information. Everything was pretty strange anyway, to be at a certain place at a certain time. And there we met somebody who basically was an English water engineer who had been also directed to go there to show us this nearby site, which was actually that the archaeologists now are saying it's the largest mainland Bronze Age city ever found in Europe. And they had no idea why it was where it was. And this was on a small conical hill in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't near any water. It wasn't the highest state. It wasn't an area for height. There were mountains all around it, and it wasn't on a trade route. And yet this group of Algaric people came from the other side of the Mediterranean and lived there for many hundreds of years and had massive defenses. And at the top of this hill was this incredibly sacred place. And we realized that's actually where the node used to be, before all the lines were made. And when we start tracking where these lines went and where they still go, the first one that really blew our heads is just that there's a place which hardly anyone knows about, except if you live in that area. And it's a site called Caravaca de la Cruz. And again, I probably pronounced that wrong. And this is literally back in the 12th century, this was a desert. And there was a small hill in the middle of this desert. And on the top, this small Templar chapel had been built. And today it's a pilgrimage site. The locals from Spain go all the way to this place. And there, all sorts of miracles were said to happen there. But getting to this site and studying it and realizing that hardly anybody had known about this place. But inside it was the most amazingly strange set of wall murals and an incredible puzzle called the apparition window, with which, and I've just had, this is radio, but there's a circular window which was infilled, and they've got about 42 symbols around the outside edge, and nobody understood what they were or what they were translated into. And I immediately saw that some of those symbols I'd seen from elsewhere. And it was at this time when there's a bit of synchronicity, the same energy line ran all the way up through Spain into France, and it went through a tiny church just south of Toulouse, a place called Monceau. And inside the Monceau church, the ceiling, which is like 50, 60 feet up in the air, has these incredible designs. And if you want to see these sites in more detail, I've got a video called Holy Grail Found, which you can find on my video section or on my YouTube channel, which has got all the information in there. But these, again, the Monceau Chapel was an early Templar site. And there seem to be these very strange symbols on the ceiling of the Monceau Chapel. And again, it was on this major energy line, which I call the Emperor Dragons now. So it was pursuing what this information was about, and it began to realize that what the Templars had been doing, what a small group of the Templars had been doing, was following these straight sacred lines to the intersections, because a large number of these Templar chapels are on these intersections. Even in this country, you'll find them on intersections. I mean, one of what most well known is at Chartres in France, and Chartres is situated on an intersection of two Type 4 lines, and along with other lines as well. So there was some group of Templars who were looking for something very special, and they seem to have got down as far as Caravaca, but they didn't find that the big major intersection, which was one in Spain, because it wasn't actually one intersection. It needed a bit of repairing, and the lines, when we came across it, the lines were, one of them was 25 kilometers from the others. But that kind of unraveled the whole sort of connection with the symbols, with alchemy, and what they were doing in Jerusalem, and what they a little book by Abramelin the Mage with some hieroglyphic figures popped up. And again, there was this massive connection with serpents and dragons and energy lines. And you begin to put them two together, and you start thinking, well, what was the Grail story all about? And Chrétien de Troyes chrétien of Troyes, and Troyes is a town in France where the Templar movement started with Bernard St. Clair, and it also it happens to be on one of the major energy lines, so and an intersection. So it's quite incredible how there's a connection all the way through with this. It seems that the original story by Chrétien, they weren't talking about a cup or anything. It was a Grail was a French name for a shallow bowl.
Yes.
And there was nothing special about it at all in the story. All that it did was it carried a wafer, which was keeping the Fisher King's father alive in a sort of very spiritual way. And it was only the additional Grail stories that began to change it. And Robert de Boron changed it into a cup, which was the cup of Christ. So I started investigating. Again, curiosity gets you into all sorts of trouble. Not so much the Grail, but the origin of the Grail properties. Because more and more people would say, well, this gave healing, this gave eternal nourishment. The Grail could rejuvenate you. Yeah. And the Grail could lead to enlightenment and manifestation. So where did these things come from? And it began to emerge that there were other Grail-like things in the Middle East that had these properties, and it seemed like the storytellers were attaching the story of this Grail with these properties, and you can see cauldrons linking this in. Yes. to bowls, and it began to connect up with these symbols on the roof of the Monceau Chapel, and then we began to understand the mysterious symbols around the apparition window at Caravaca de la Cruz, and it looked more and more that the energy shapes at these intersections changed over time into double torus and vortexes, and that happens 4 times a year. And you have this Grail shape, if you like, of energy vortex within double torus, which is when it happened 4 times a year on the ancient Hebrew holy days, which was the Tekufa. That was the day before the feast day. And the feast day of St. John, for instance, was the summer solstice. And that was the first day of the sun cycle. But the holy day was the last day of the sun cycle, which is what they call the Tekufa. And the times when all these formations, energy formations, would occur was always the last day of the sun cycle. And for months I wondered, why was it not on the solstice, and why was it not on the equinox? It was always the day before, and it lasted for about half a day. Now that's changed since, because they're now lasting for about 12 days long. It's just gradually, this whole harmony time has increased. So you've got this Grail shape, which seemingly when you meditate on this and with your own double torus energy shape and develop some sort of resonance, again, vibrational resonance with this energy shape, it appears to open up the connection between the conscious and the subconscious mind in ways that allow you to do things which are not as easily able to do if you haven't got that resonance. Right. And then it's not just an individual thing, there's a group element of thing coming into this as well. So curiosity from the energies, following the synchronicity, led me to the Templar churches connected to these energies, and that led me to the story of the Grail. So you just end up following synchronicity, and you find the path.
I've found some similarities, obviously, even in the stuff I've been doing here with the Slavic connection that we've talked about offline. And if you look at some of the Slavic God symbols, the circular type swastika, for example, is the symbol of one of the gods. And if you start looking at those symbols, I'm seeing things I'm dowsing. Yes. And I think, that we're seeing the repetition at a lower level of the same thing that you saw. And also, I was surprised to find that there were a couple of Templar sites in Moravia here as well. And both of them have, strong energy lines running through them. Mind you, one thing that I find quite interesting is, and maybe it's just a bias up until now, but as you know, I'm really finding very small lines here, predominantly, I would say 5 to 12 meters wide. They seem to be the predominant line here. Do you think that's because I've missed some bigger ones, or do you think that, given that there's association of these lines with all these Slavic sites as well, maybe there is something strange about this particular part of the world not being particularly like the UK or Western Europe?
I would say that it's all very, very similar. In the regards to what you're discovering over there is just not been looked at for many, many centuries. And it's not really been looked at in our country, in the UK, but to come to these small type lines, and small's probably the wrong word. I mean, they for me, they're different groups which have different frequencies. They're just as valid as the larger lines with the slower frequencies, and they have different functions and purposes. And you can find, for instance, the type 1 lines, I call them type 1 lines, they're about 9 to 11 paces wide, and they can typically have 6 hours movement one way, 6 hours movement the other way. And when you've got 4 pairs of those, just those types of lines coming together, the amount of times I've found that happening in very small chapels, and often ones which were just for women, for anchorites and that sort of thing. And the sensation of meditating in those places compared to the much more powerful energy frequencies is a very different meditative sensation. It's a you can describe it as divinely feminine and things like that, but there's a different function at those sites, and it's almost as though these different frequencies will sit with different people in different ways, and there's a preference, and there'll be an order of people who think in certain ways that will just want to be working with those particular frequencies of lines. And then you might find that within a country, an area will be just focusing on these types of frequencies and this types of line. But in another part of the country, and the sad thing about it is there's a particular type of frequencies we call the moon phase lines, because the frequencies are affected by the moon. And it's absolutely clear that the more darker arts favor these, and they get into rather nasty practices of where they use negative emotions to enhance the effects of what they wish to manifest. And these leave very bad impressions on these areas where these lines are. And it's one of the problems that we face within the work that we do. So, I mean, hopefully you won't have come across any of this, too many of them.
I think I may have done. I think, again, we talked about Hoska Castle, the gate to hell, north of Prague in the beautiful Český Raj area. And this is associated with negative energy. It's associated with ghouls and demons and things that come out of a hole and steal cattle and wives and children and so on and so forth. The site is quite strange because the castle was built, so they say, to keep something in as opposed to keep something out. I've been there several times, and it does have a peculiar atmosphere. I can feel it 20 kilometres away. Yeah. And it has a history of, like, the Nazis occupied the castle during World War II and was said to have conducted... The group of SS that was doing the occult work was supposed to have been stationed there. And prior to that, there was supposed to have been a Czech black magician doing work there as well. So I suspect this could be one of these places. I need to go back and have more time. Last time I was there, I was with my 13-year-old daughter, and she was not impressed at me wandering around with 2 sticks with 500 tourists. Dad, what are you doing? Put them away, Dad, please.
I have sons that don't like me walking around with rods as well. Yes. But do, I think, go and find out what types of lines are running in and around there. I mean, I found some
what horrific... are these moon lines like? How you've got this classification, so I don't know that I've come across one. So how would I recognize one, Rory?
Well, they're quite similar in width to the type 1 lines, but the way we teach people to differentiate them is to bring the guard down, or take your protection away, and breathe in the energy and notice where you feel a sensation in your body. And it's got a particular feeling. Commonly amongst most people, it's like someone's sitting on the top of your chest really heavily here. And I feel that way. But other people feel it in their temples. Some people feel it in the feet. Like their feet are firing up. And so that's the quick way of knowing whether you're on a moon phase line. But the slightly slower way is to measure its side-to-side movement over a period of time. And what happens is when you're not at a node, when you're in the middle of the lines sort of move side to side, but at the half moon point, the line stops. It doesn't move for a short while. And then the next time the next day, it has a slight reversal and then it goes back on the same direction. And then the next day, you find that slight reversal has become a bigger reversal before it carries on its own way. And so all the way until the full moon and the new moon, when it becomes that reversals become the full movement one way and the other way. And it's like that for the next quarter of the month until suddenly the half moon point comes again, when you've got this sudden cease of movement for a moment. And that's the signature for the moon phase line. So we know the moon, when it's at right angles to the sun and the earth, has an effect over this line. And as to why, it's probably some sort of gravitational aspect of which can affect it. But that is what leads to this rather nasty feeling. But then some people quite like this feeling. And that's the more depraved and manic-minded people who convince themselves that pain is probably their pleasure. They kind of really enjoy these energies, and they enjoy the fact that these energies aren't sitting nicely on the people they wish to punish. And again, because these energies are a frequency which allows them to connect to the subconscious, they can use these frequencies in ways which really are very nice. And it enhances their power, their ego, and all those things in ways where, if they continue to do this at a site, the site itself becomes an area where the other energies avoid. And that's and takes us into another area. But
where I was going to go was into, on your website, you've got an area that talks about, I think you're trying to set up a not-for-profit group related to working with the lines. I don't know how far you've got with that, but perhaps it would be a good way to sort of finish this, talking about what you think the importance of the field, the energy field, is, and how humanity should be working with it, and what you're doing to try to encourage people to do that.
For me, it's all about getting people to realize where their local sacred sites are, and to go there and meditate on those sites with other people locally on these harmony times. And when you start doing group meditation at these sites, and it's an interfaith thing where you can do it with anyone, whether they're Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist, or Christian. It's a coming together and connecting through meditation and prayer. You do your own thing your own way, but the effects of doing it at a sacred site, because of these energies that are all in harmony, is phenomenal. And the group effect is phenomenal. And I think it's brought people together. And I think in this particular world, that's something which is really important. It's adding a local dimension, which I think is important, because increasingly central governments try to take a lot more power away from the locals. So for me, it's about, I'm looking at setting up a website which will identify where these local sites are, and it'll allow people to start meditation groups, both online and on site, at these places. And in a way, a bit like the energies teach us when we go on a journey, the energies will teach people when they go onto these meditative sites. We don't have to worry about what happens, because as Jung once said, we're tools of the numinous, and that is like what we think, that we're in a conscious mind have control over our subconscious, but actually it's the subconscious that has control over us. And the energies will dictate and show and provide the path for us. And I think that's a journey we all need to go on. And for me, it's about encouraging the energy work, exploring synchronicity. And if I can do that, I know the world's going to be a better place.
And how would someone find, I mean, does it have to be like a major energy line node, or can it be anything, even a type 1 node or something like that?
Well, the good news is that once you've meditated on a really powerful node, you don't actually have to go back there. It's carried within your system. So you can actually just go for top-ups at the small local node, or you can make a trip to a bigger node. And at this point, I'm beginning to sound as though I know an awful lot about this, and I don't. So it's important to realize we're just beginning to learn this journey and the effects of working with groups of people on these energy sites. I really don't know that I can say too much more, but I know that it's having a major impact and a positive impact on people.
As you know from other conversations we've had, I mean, I've found this to be you talk about things happening. It's amazing once you start doing this. As I've told you, it's very difficult to describe to someone that hasn't done it. But the way these things seem to connect your own life back to you is so ridiculous that you really start to rethink the whole nature of reality and how it works. So I'm with you. I think I think encouraging people to do this is a great thing. I just wonder though, if you have 2 type 1 lines crossing in a church, do you think that's a good place to go to do this sort of meditation to start with, if you can't find anything else?
It's certainly it's going to be better than just doing it in the middle of the park and nowhere. I think you'd need more than just 2 pairs of type 1 lines, definitely. But in order for a node to be able to come into this harmonic energy, you need a minimum of at least 2 pairs of lines, probably 4 pairs. There's probably a small node roughly every square kilometre of land. Where you don't find small nodes in every square kilometre is when there's a larger node nearby, because that larger node will bring more lines to that. So if you've got a really powerful node, it'll draw 8 pairs of type 3s, 2s and 1s, and of course you then will have a whole area around it where there aren't nodes. So there are a lot around. You can start dowsing and find where they are yourself, or go to an area where you know there are lines and pick them up there. But there will be nodes nearby, and strong nodes nearby. And of course, this is exactly what used to happen. If you start looking at the numbers of stone circles or ancient dolmens and burial grounds, even in just looking at the southern part of Germany around Hanover, I was absolutely gobsmacked at finding about the Sun Temple there at Gosek. And the numbers of sites are just similar. I think the archaeologists say there's about 250 sites and they've only explored 10. And you get this image of our ancestors in groups all around Europe, meditating, whole families and communities meditating at these certain times of the year, all around, and doing it because it was so natural to them. And yet we've lost that. We can't see it because most of these ancient sites have been hidden, or were not discussed or not looked at. But everything seems in nature to be very cyclic, and I think we're going in. What Steiner talks about is we're moving from individual consciousness back to group consciousness again. And I think that if this energetic environment continues to become enhanced with all this increasing cosmic energy, because our magnetic fields are coming down, then what we're going to experience is this desire, this increasing desire for humans to come together more. And we're already seeing increasing empathy, increasing telepathy, which is actually one of the reasons we're getting some of the problems in the world, because people can feel lies now. Yeah. And you just, it used to just be when you saw a politician moving their lips, you'd know they were lying, but now you can feel they're lying. And after a while, that gets a bit irksome, and you just switch off.
I think another problem is it's not just politicians. When you actually sit back and you think about everything, you start to realize that everything you ever thought you knew is a lie.
Yeah.
History, science, everything. And it's at that point when you just basically have to, I don't know, you have to start. What I did was I started to try to rely on my own intuition much more. And so it forces you to intuit as opposed to logic things. And I think that's a good thing.
It is. And I've been, for the last 2 years, I've been really studying Jung and his Red Book and his images and reading about his experiences of inner visualization from 1913 to 1999 and how he changed in his life was phenomenal, because he was challenged for all his weaknesses, and amongst the weaknesses were his forethinking. He was thinking about duality. He was thinking about Christianity, and everything where he was wrong on, all the rigid thinking and the dogma.
Yeah.
He was being challenged by the characters, the subconscious that he was coming across. And it's as though there is this movement for us towards looking for the truth coming through again now. And if we cling in any dogmatic or fixed way to anything that might not be right, we're going to be going through those same challenges. So there's this like, well, you're left with thinking, well, all I want is the truth. I want to get closer to that. And I think that's what the big awakening that's happening now around the world is, the desire now, I just want to know the truth.
Yes. And I think that when you give instructions to go out dowsing with an open mind, this is a reflection of that, correct?
Yeah. I mean, you have to have a curiosity in your focused mind, but you have to recognize that even though you're curious and you're asking a question, you have to be glad to be given anything. Because as soon as you take curiosity, which is your own inner individual egocentric aspect of what you would like to find out about, to get the information from the subconscious, you have to go into that aware state where you can't have any certainty, you can't have any desire. All you can do is have that, okay, just show me what I need to know. Yeah. Show me the truth.
That's great. Good place to stop. And with that, could you, if people want to follow up, want to learn more about your work, want to join us doing dowsing, where would they go to find out more?
Just roryduff.com.
And you mentioned the videos. I've watched that particular video. It's really, really well done and very well worth watching. I'll put a link in the notes. So thanks. I appreciate it. Well, thanks for listening to this episode of the Magical World of G. Michael Vasey podcast. My thanks to our guest today, Rory Duff. You can find out more about Rory at roryduff.com, and I recommend a visit to his YouTube channel because he's got some really awesome videos out there that are well worth sitting down and watching and very entertaining at the same time. You can find out more about Rory and how to contact in the notes below. Well, if you enjoyed this podcast, would you please like it, share it, and suggest it to other people? I'd very much appreciate that. In the meantime, this is G. Michael Vasey saying thank you for listening. Goodbye.